Shall we turn now in our Bibles to Genesis chapter 42? Just as you're turning there, a brief synopsis of the story up to this point. As you know, Jacob had 12 sons, 4 different wives. And the wife whom he loved dearly, Rachel, bore him 2 sons. Because of his love for Rachel, they became his favorite sons, and they were his 2 youngest sons, Joseph and Benjamin. The other sons of Jacob were not too honorable. Joseph was, but there developed a friction between the boys because of the dishonor of the older sons and the honor of Joseph. The older boys were treacherous. They were very cruel. Joseph was more compassionate, kind, understanding, and they were very jealous of Joseph, of his father's obvious favoritism. Joseph had a couple of dreams, didn't he? Made them boys really angry. He dreamed that he and his brothers were in the field binding their sheaves of barley, and his brothers' sheaves all bowed down to his, and for some reason he couldn't wait to tell them that. And it really upset them to think that they would bow down to Joseph. Then later he dreamed of the sun, the moon, and the stars all bowing down to him. His father sent Joseph out into the area of Dothan where his brothers were keeping the flocks. They hadn't been back home in a while, so he sent Joseph out to look for them and to make sure they were okay, find out how they were doing. And when they saw Joseph coming, they said, "Oh, here comes that dreamer. Let's kill him, and we'll see what happens to his dreams then." The oldest brother, Reuben, says, No, let's not kill him. Let's throw him into the pit and starve him to death. We don't want to get all bloody. So as Joseph came up, they threw him into this pit. He was begging for mercy, kicking and screaming, asking them to bring him out and all, but they just had no heart towards him whatsoever. And then when they saw a caravan headed toward Egypt, Judah suggested that maybe they could just sell him as a slave. That way they haven't killed him, yet they got rid of him. And so they stopped the caravan and they sold their brother Joseph for 20 pieces of silver. So he was taken by these traders down to Egypt, where he then was auctioned, purchased by a man. Eventually, he was sold twice. Eventually purchased by a man whose name was Potiphar, who was the captain of the guard for the Pharaoh of Egypt. Joseph, while in Egypt, was a diligent, faithful servant in the house of Potiphar. Potiphar was blessed because of Joseph's diligence, and everything that he touched seemed to turn to gold. But Potiphar's wife cast lustful eyes upon him and sought to seduce him. When Joseph refused to be seduced, one day she grabbed him by the coat, tried to disrobe him, force him into bed, and he fled from the house, leaving the coat in her hands. And being scorned, she began to cry rape, reported it to the servants, and then later to her husband, Potiphar. Joseph was then accused and convicted of attempted rape. There was no trial. It just was what she said. So as a result, that Joseph then was thrown into jail. 17 years old at the time that his brothers sold him into Egypt. How long he was a servant in Potiphar's house, we don't know exactly. Presumably, scholars say between 8 and 10 years. Depends on whose writing that you're reading. While he was imprisoned, he was a model prisoner. And soon they made him sort of the head over the prison, the captain of the prison, and he had charge over all the other prisoners. Well, somewhere during that time, the Pharaoh's butler and the baker were cast into prison when a servant discovered some poison in the castle. And neither one admitted to owning it, so they were both thrown into the jail while the investigation continued. While in prison, both of them have dreams which Joseph interprets, where the butler was to be restored to his position and the baker was to be hung. The dreams came to pass. Joseph tells the butler, when you come into the Pharaoh, please don't forget to tell him about me. But he forgot. And Joseph remained for another 2 years in that prison until the Pharaoh himself had a dream. And Pharaoh called his wise men in, his magicians and enchanters and diviners, to interpret the dream, to tell him what it meant. And they were not able to do so. And then suddenly, all of a sudden, the RNA begins to buzz in the brain of the butler. He begins to remember now, and he says, oh, King, I've done a terrible thing. So he says, there's this man who is a Hebrew, and he's imprisoned, and he's able to interpret dreams. The baker and I both had dreams that he interpreted, and it came to pass just as he said. Perhaps he could interpret your dreams, King. And so they ordered Joseph to be brought quickly. And so he shaved, came in before the Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, I understand you can interpret dreams. Joseph said, well, not really, not me. But God is able to give to the Pharaoh an answer of peace. What is your dream? Pharaoh tells Joseph the dream of the 7 cows being eaten up by the 7 skinny cows. And Joseph said, well, God has told you that there will be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of horrible famine, which will be so great that the lean years will eat up the fat. Joseph said, I suggest that you appoint a wise and trustworthy man over your kingdom during those good years. I would suggest that you gather 20% of the crops, put them in the storehouses, so that when the lean years come, you'll be able to distribute it to the people, and you will be saved. Well, Pharaoh said, truth be told, I can't find a wiser man than you, really, in all of the kingdom, because only you were able to tell me what the dream meant, and it makes perfect sense. So he took the signet ring, his authority, and gave it to Joseph. He said, you're in charge. Only I am above you in the land. And he ordered that when Joseph went out into the chariot, the people would go out in front of them crying, and they would bow down to Joseph as he rode the chariots through the streets. Somebody would go in front of him and yell, Joseph is coming, Joseph is coming, and everyone would bow. During the 7 years of plenty, he indeed gathered into the storehouses until they lost count of the abundance of grain that was gathered in the 7 good years. So history doesn't tell us exactly what they gathered, but it was a lot. But then began the famine, the lean years. So we come tonight to chapter 42. Meanwhile, back home, famine has hit really, really hard. Jacob's family is now struggling to say the least. Verse 1. When Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, why do you look at one another? Now, they were probably looking at each other like, what are we going to do? How are we going to survive this? And why are you looking at one another? And he said, indeed, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place, buy for us there, that we may live and not die. We have money, we just don't have any crop. Go get us some grain. Jacob was an extremely wealthy man. He had the money to buy the grain, but if there's no grain to be bought, all of your money doesn't do you any good. But there is grain in Egypt. Go down and buy it. So Joseph's 10 brothers, the 11th, Benjamin, stayed home with the father, but his 10 brothers went, and Benjamin was Joseph's younger brother, his only full brother. Benjamin, let me just say as a preface, Joseph and Benjamin, their hearts were tied. They're knitted together. They grew up as the youngest. Benjamin looked to Joseph. Joseph played with Benjamin from a child, from a baby. And Jacob, the father, loved Benjamin just as he loved Joseph, having been birthed by Rachel, because he loved Rachel among all of the other wives that he had had. So those were his two favorites. Joseph loved Benjamin about as much as these older brothers loved their little sister. Remember that? He loved Benjamin the same way. So Jacob isn't letting Benjamin go with these guys, okay? Last time we did that, Joseph never came back. So Benjamin's staying home. He's very protective. Joseph at this time was 37 years old. He was 17 when he was sold by his brothers, had been in Egypt now for 20 years. So he's between 37 and 38 years old. His brother Benjamin would be about 23. And the last time Joseph saw him, Benjamin was just a little kid of about 3 years old. He had not seen his little brother Benjamin for a long, long time. But because Joseph was thought to be dead, Jacob sort of protected him. And Benjamin took the place of Joseph in the heart of his father. Verse 3. So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt, but Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. I don't know, some wild beast would tear him up. He's being sarcastic. I don't want him hurt. He's not going. And the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. It had spread. It was actually a worldwide famine, quite severe. People were journeying from all over down to Egypt to buy grain, because word got out that there is plenty of grain in Egypt. So they came with these other people who were journeying to Egypt to purchase grain, and they just kind of joined the caravan. People were traveling, and they just kind of got in line, and the 10 brothers began to just follow the caravan to Egypt. And so Joseph, verse 6, was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. I can imagine at that point, Joseph remembered the dream. And up in verse 9, it tells us that he did remember the dream, saw his brothers bowing down, and that dream, remember where he had gathered together his sheaves, interestingly enough, the grain and his brothers all bow down to his. And as they are bowing down there on the ground, I can imagine that dream flashing back in his mind. Now, in as much as he was only 17 when they left, he was about 38 now, they didn't recognize him. Of course, he's dressed as an Egyptian. He spoke to them through an interpreter. He would not speak to them in Hebrew. He used an interpreter to speak to them, so they had no idea that this was Joseph. And verse 7, Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. Then he said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them and said to them, "You are spies. You've come to spy out the nakedness of the land. You've been sent by a government because they heard that we have plenty of grain, and you're going to bring down your armies, and you're going to invade us, and you're going to try to take away our food. You're spies." And they said to him, "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's sons. We are very honest men." Now, I don't know that I would agree with that. But in reality, what they are asserting is that we are telling you the truth in this matter. We're not spies. We're really brothers. That is the truth. Well, they were honest in that at least. And they weren't honest any other time, but they were honest in that. When they sold Joseph, they weren't honest. Took his coat, highly recognizable by his dad, killed the little goat, put the blood on the coat, tore it up, took it to dad, allowed their dad to grieve this horrible bereavement for years. Callous souls. But here they're telling the truth. Your servants are not spies, verse 12. But he said to them, no, no, you have come to see the nakedness of the land. And they said, your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. 12 brothers? I count 10. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more. So there's 10 of us. The youngest is with our dad, and one of them has died. They didn't really know what happened to Joseph, having lost track. One isn't anymore. He's no longer there, but we are 12 brothers. Verse 14, but Joseph said to them, like I said, you're spies. In this manner you will be tested as spies. I swear to you, by the life of Pharaoh, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Joseph wants to see Benjamin, doesn't he? He wants to see his little brother. Send one of you and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there's any truth in you. Or else, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. You will be executed on the front lawn. So he put them, all 10 of them, together in prison for 3 days. Now, he didn't tell them it was only for 3 days. That's just how it ended up. They didn't know. This is a game, or, they really didn't know what was going on. And as I'm reading, and as you're reading, and we come to this place, we don't know what's going on either, do we? All we know is that they were in prison 3 days. Is this a game? Is there a little bit of revenge that Joseph is taking? There are those Jewish commentators who do ascribe to Joseph higher motives than that. They say Joseph deeply believed in the promises of God that through this family, the nation would be developed from which Messiah will come. Jacob had shared with his sons those truths of God, and that Joseph believed it. And he really was seeking to prove his brothers and to find out if indeed any change had taken place in the 20 years that he'd been gone. He's testing his brothers. He's testing them. But from that, perhaps I think Joseph is enjoying the whole thing. Why wouldn't he? He had spent 10 years or more. The book of Jasher says 12. No one knows exactly. But he spent a long time in that filthy prison because of these so-called brothers. And he's given them a really bad time. So for 3 days, and they don't know that it's only 3 days, they're sitting there in jail sweating. Have no idea that this is Joseph. They don't know that he's just giving them a bad time. For all they know, they've landed in the slammer for the rest of their lives. They don't know. Verse 18, then Joseph said to them on the 3rd day, do this and live, for I fear God. That should have given them a little bit of insight. Here's an Egyptian, as far as they are concerned, who were very polytheistic people. And yet he's declaring to them, I fear God. One God. I fear God. Verse 19, if you are honest men, then let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house. We're tired of feeding all 10 of you. But you go and carry grain for the famine of your houses. Bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and I'll let you live. And so they did. Then they said to one another, we are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore, this distress has come upon us. Now they are all reverting back. Guilt. We are guilty concerning our brother Joseph. We saw the anguish when he pleaded with us, and we wouldn't hearken to him. We wouldn't listen. We let him go anyway. So now this distress has come upon us. And the Jewish people always figure that is what has happened. Remember when Job went through all that Job had went through, and his friends came along and said, oh, well, apparently you've done something wrong. Because they always attribute misfortune to something of God's doing in response to something that they had done. So guilt, here they're feeling guilty. Guilt is a hard thing to get rid of. Our brain is a marvelous computer. It has such tremendous capacities of memory. That little RNA can store up so much information, and all it needs is the right stimuli to pop that information back into the screen. You ever seen someone and you thought, man, I know them. Where do I know them from? And so you try hard to remember and you can't, and then maybe you're driving down the street and flash, oh yeah, that's their name. Remember that? Sure. And all of the information that you have in your storage bank gets flashed up there on the screen, and then you say, oh, of course, that was John Bunyan. I remember him now. The storage of the brain has tremendous capacity, and all you need is the right stimulus to pop it in. Well, what's also stored up there is every sin that you have ever committed. You may not recall them instantly. You may not be able to recall them all right now. But with the right stimulus, there it is. Now, these brothers are in distress. Their lives, as far as they know, are on the line. This guy, Joseph, is treating them harshly. This governor, he's a hard nose. And he's really putting them through the paces. And they just spent 3 days in jail, and one of the brothers is going to be kept in jail, and he thinks that they're spies, and man, he's mean, he's tough, and they said, we're guilty. They looked at each other and said, we're guilty, we deserve this. We saw the anguish of our little brother's soul. We didn't do anything about it, so this has come upon us. We didn't listen to his pleas. We're getting exactly what we deserve. And they realized that though they are trying to get rid of the sense of guilt for what they did to their younger brother, still it is coming back on them. Guilt is so hard to get rid of. You may think that you have repressed it. You may think that you have gotten all of it out of your mind and now you're free, but given the right set of circumstances, and that haunting guilt is still there, and it rises as a scepter. But how necessary it is to get rid of guilt. From a psychological standpoint, guilt creates the subconscious desire for punishment, which is manifested in self-harm, accidents, or in neurotic behavior patterns. Guilt can drive you crazy, in other words. It can make you do bizarre things because you have a subconscious desire to punish yourself. And that's why you started the neurotic behavior patterns, to bring upon yourself the disapproval from your peers, because subconsciously, I desire to be punished because I know I did wrong and I know I deserve it. From a spiritual sense, guilt will destroy you. It will destroy you. The wages of sin is death. The soul that sinneth shall surely die. And guilt, unconfessed sin, can bring you into an alienated relationship with God, where you no longer hear the voice of God, you no longer see the glory of God, you no longer feel the presence of God. You're simply spiritually dead. And as the psalmist said in Psalm 32, when I sought to hide my sin, there was a constant roaring inside of me, such a turmoil. Your hand was heavy upon me. There was no moisture within. I became as dry and parched as the drought of summer. Oh, how sin, how guilt can just shrivel you up inside spiritually. Got to get rid of it. These guys had carried it now for 20 years. 20 years they carried the memory of what they had done to Joseph. They hid that secret for 20 years. And now, faced with real problems, here it comes. It comes up. We're guilty, they said, 20 years. And that thing hangs on until it's removed. And the only thing I know that can effectively and completely remove guilt is the blood of Jesus Christ. That can remove guilt. For if we confess our sins, He is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to what? Cleanse us, wash us, scrub us from all unrighteousness. For the blood of Jesus Christ, God's Son, cleanses a man from every bit of his sin. Jesus will do for you what no psychologist can do. It'll wash the slate clean. You got to get it washed. Verse 22. Reuben, the oldest brother, answered them, saying, well, didn't I tell you? Didn't I speak to you, saying, do not sin against the boy? And you wouldn't listen? Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us. Surely he's dead by now, and now our blood is going to be required. Reuben is explaining the law of sowing and reaping. He was well aware of it. He's the oldest. He was in charge that day. He could have stopped the whole mess by standing firm and saying, no, we're not doing this. And they would have had to listen to him. But he didn't. He tried to play both sides. Well, let's not kill him. Let's just throw him into the pit, thinking he'd come back later and rescue his little brother. And what happened when he came back? He wasn't there. Reuben is trying to exonerate himself. And in most Western circles, in most churches, you're going to hear teachers and preachers and commentators giving Reuben a big old pass, explaining how innocent he was in the whole thing. But you won't find that mindset among Jewish scholars. They hold him more responsible than any of the other brothers. They hold him higher in responsibility since he was the oldest and he controlled the entire outcome. They put most of the blame on him. And he says to them, now look what you've done to us. Verse 23, but they didn't know that Joseph understood them. He was listening to them. He understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. And he turned himself away from them and wept. He actually went into another room, wept, washed his face off, and then he returned to them again and talked rough with them. And he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. Oh, Simeon, Simeon. Do you remember Levi and Simeon as they went into the city of Shechem and killed those males? Simeon, Simeon never really did come around. Simeon was hard all the way until he died. Anyway, carted him off to prison as he was begging and pleading. Sounds familiar, right? I suspect that Simeon was the ringleader. Simeon was the next oldest under Reuben. I believe he was the one who had devised that whole conspiracy against Joseph. He wanted to kill Joseph. Simeon, that guy again that took Levi, went in, killed the king and prince of Shechem along with every male in that city. Cruel. And Joseph knows this. And he's gonna get old Simeon now. He's gonna get him. Then Joseph gave a command to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. Thus he did for them. So they loaded their donkeys with the grain and departed from there. But as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey feed at the encampment, he saw his money, and there it was in the mouth of his sack. The very money that he used to buy the grain was in his sack. So he said to his brothers, my money has come back to me. My money has been restored, and there it is in my sack. And their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, what is this that God has done to us? This guy's going to think we ripped him off. This guy's going to think that we stole the grain. We paid for it, but here our money's here. Every penny of what we paid for the grain has landed back in our luggage. How are we ever going to go back and face that guy? He's mean. Then they went to Jacob, their father, in the land of Canaan, and told him all that had happened to them, saying, the man who is Lord of the land spoke roughly to us, took us for spies of the country. But we said to him, we are honest men. We are not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is with our father this day in the land of Canaan. Then the man, the Lord of the country, said to us, by this I will know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me. Take food for the famine, for your whole household, and be gone. Get out of here. And bring your youngest brother back to me, so I will know that you are not spies, but you are honest men. And then I'm going to allow your brother to be released back to you, and you can trade in the land. So when you come back again, bring your youngest brother. Oh, how Joseph longed to see Benjamin. tells him, prove that you're telling the truth. If not, then don't expect to ever see my face or the face of the face of your brother again, Simeon. We're going to hang him as a spy. Right out here on the front lawn, that's where they hung people. Then it happened as they emptied their sacks that surprisingly, each man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob, their father, said to them, you have bereaved me of my children. Because of you, Joseph is no more. Simeon's now no more. And you want to take Benjamin? So we see here that Jacob, somewhere along the line, came to suspect them in regard to Joseph. He always had a suspicion that they had done something to him. He is casting direct blame on these brothers. First Joseph, now Simeon, and you want to take my baby boy? Oy vey, all these things are against me. And as far as he could see, yes, they were. As far as he could see. And we so often with Jacob, with our limited vision, with our inability to see past today, we look at the circumstances of our life and we say, oh, everything is going against me. Peter called it the nearsightedness of the believer, my inability to peer into tomorrow, into next week and next month, and looking at my situation today, looking at the difficulties that I'm facing today. I'm often prone to cry out with Jacob, everything is going against me. When you just see today. It's only because I don't know the whole plan of God. Jacob didn't know that his novel was not yet complete. It had been completed by God, but he wasn't at the end of the novel yet. Jacob didn't realize that this rough lord in Egypt was none other than his son, whom he loved, Joseph. And he didn't realize that before long, he was going to be embracing Joseph, weeping together with him, sharing the joy of being reunited. Jacob, don't you know that God has a wonderful plan? He didn't know all the wonderful things that God had in store for him. Only being able to see up to this point, he cried out, all things are against me. Not so, Jacob, not so. And in your own life, when you're prone to cry out, all things are against me, it's not so. All things actually are working together for you. Well, you don't know what I'm going through. Doesn't matter. You don't know how long I've been going through. Doesn't matter. For the good to those who love God and are the called according to His purpose, all things are working together for your good. Just wait. Wait for the next chapter. Hey, Jacob, just wait till we get into the next chapter. Man, I've already read it. It's cool. You're going to love it. But right now, you don't see it. You know, all things are against me. Oh, if you could only see how this thing's going to turn out. David said, if I should number the thoughts of God concerning me, they are more than the sands of the sea. Next time you get discouraged, go sit in the sand and just pick it up and let it trickle through your hands. Throw it up in the air and try to count the grains as they come down. And then look along that long beach line and try to guess how many grains of sand there are. And then remember that God's thoughts towards me are even more than all the sands of the sea, of the world. Because He's thinking about you constantly. God is watching you because He loves you so much, He can't take His eyes off of you. That's how much He loves you. Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. I need to take Benjamin. If I don't bring him back, you can kill my 2 sons. Put him in my hands, and I'll bring him back to you. Reuben, you are so unstable. What good would it do me to kill 2 of my grandchildren? You are a wildcat. Talking off the top of your head. But that's Reuben, unstable as water. Now, interestingly enough, you see 20 years has gone by, remember? So it was 20 years, and we don't know much of really what was happening to Joseph's brothers during those 20 years. We know quite a bit about what happened to Joseph because we were following that story through the Scripture. But meanwhile, back home, all we know is that one story of, who was that? Judah and Tamar. That's all we had in chapter 30. But we really don't know much about what was going on back home. But what we do find out is that the other son got married. They had children. They had families and all, and which was only natural at that point. Reuben at least had 2 sons, and he promises them as surety for Benjamin. You can kill my 2 sons if I don't bring him back. But I need to go. Benjamin needs to come with us. But he said, my son will not go down with you. His brother's dead already, and he's left alone. If any calamity would befall him along the way in which you go, then you would bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. It would kill me. No way, he's not going. You can forget it. That's exactly what he was saying. You can forget it. You're not taking Ben. Brings us to chapter 43, I see. The famine was severe in the land, and it came to pass when they had eaten up the grain which they had bought from Egypt, that their father said to them, go back, buy us a little food. But Judah spoke to him, saying, the man solemnly warned us, saying, you will not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. But if you don't send him with us, we're not going down. That man said, you will not see my face unless your brother is with you. Dad, come on, you don't understand what's going on here. That guy's mean. We're not going down. We just won't go unless Benjamin goes with us. That's all there is to it. And Israel said, Jacob said, why did you deal so wrongfully with me as to tell the man whether you even had another brother? Why would you even tell him you had another brother? Jacob is kind of looking at the situation going, if you hadn't even said anything, then we wouldn't even be in this mess. Why do you have to tell him that kind of stuff? He didn't even have to know about the other brother. But they said, well, the man asked us pointedly about ourselves and our family, saying, is your father still alive? Have you another brother? He was asking us all kinds of pointed questions. And we told him according to these words. Could we possibly have known that he would say, okay, bring your brother down then? Don't put that on us. I told you, Dad, he's a jerk. The guy's mean and nasty and rough. Then Judah said to Israel, his father, Dad, send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die. We're going to die here without food, both we and you and our little ones. So Judah indicates here all of them had children, all the little ones, he says. Now, let me have Benjamin and let's go so we don't die of starvation. We're sitting around here talking. Just let me take him. I myself will be surety for him. From my hand you will require him. If I don't bring him back and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. I'll take personal responsibility for him. Hold me personally responsible for his life. Verse 10, for if we had not lingered so long talking about all this mess, surely by now we would have returned the second time. We would have already been gone and back by now. Let's go. Let's not stall any further. Give him to me. I will be the surety for him. We've waited too long already. We're getting hungry and we're about to run out of food. And this tells you the position that Judah had within the family. And their father Israel said to them, well, if it must be so, then do it. Do this. He's scheming. Oh, Jacob, you're still scheming. I can hear this is you're going to come up with something here. Still using that scheming process. If it's got to be done, then do this. Take some of the best fruit of the land in your vessel. Carry down a present for the man. A little balm, a little honey, spices and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds. These are things that were not found in Egypt to any extent. And these are the things that those traders were carrying with them, highly desired. Interestingly enough, when they were heading to Egypt and the brothers sold Joseph, they were carrying balms and spices and nuts down to Egypt to trade because those were the commodities that they didn't have in Egypt. So take double money in your hand. Take back in your hand the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Maybe it was an oversight. Who knows? Take your brother also, and arise, go back to the man, and may God Almighty, El Shaddai, give you mercy before the man, that he may release your older brother and Benjamin. If I am bereaved, I am bereaved. Jacob was brought to the point of that full commitment. Okay, go. If I'm bereaved, I'm bereaved. He's facing the ultimate worst thing that could happen. You remember Esther made a similar statement when her cousin Mordecai was insisting that she go into the king, Artaxerxes, and plead for the people. She says, I can't go unless he bids me, unless he allows me, unless he raises a golden scepter. If I intrude in there, the guards will take off my head. And that was the rule. And he said, now look, don't think that if this decree is carried out to kill all the Jews that you're going to escape being in the palace there. Esther, you're not going to escape. That's not going to save you. And if you fail, God will save his people. And how do you know that God hasn't brought you to the kingdom for just this purpose? So she says, oh, okay, I'll go in. But pray for me. Fast. Pray for me. And if I perish, I perish. I'll do it. I'll step out and I'll take the consequences. Jacob said, if I'm bereaved, I'm bereaved. I just have to commit it to God. It's out of my control. Just that commitment where you just rest in the providential care of God. It's beyond anything that you can do, anything that you can control. And you got to say, well, you know, what may come, comes. Come what may. I just put it into God's hands. Lord, do what you're going to do. I'm closing my eyes here, but I can't do a thing about it. And that is exactly where Jacob was in the whole thing. And not such a bad place to be, really, in the providential care of God. If it has to be, it has to be. And so we're going to close here tonight, just a little bit early. And it's going to do our schedule great. We've got just a few more weeks to go. By the way, April 2nd will be our last portion of Genesis. We're going to conclude Genesis on April 2nd. Easter is April the 9th, so there will not be any service on April the 9th that evening. So April 16th, we get to come back. We're going to have some fellowship out here, present certificates, flash drives of all of the Genesis series. For those of you that have participated, we have a certificate and a flash drive for you. You're going to be asked to sign or print, maybe you already have, to print your name as you want it to appear on the certificate so we can have those made up, ready for you. And then you have a decision to make. Do you want to continue through the Bible, or you want to take the summer off, or what do you want to do? I'm prepared to do anything you want. I love doing this, and I would be willing to do it and continue to do it, but only if there is, I don't want to say a demand, but only if there is only if you want to. You want to go? You want to keep going? All right, if you want to keep going, raise your hand. Okay? If you don't, then April 2nd will be it for you. Well, we're going to go right on into Exodus and the story of Moses and oh my goodness, it does get, and so we're following Egypt all the way through. Joseph is going to get buried at the end of this chapter. And interestingly enough, he's going to go back to Shechem, the place, the scene of the crime. Remember where his brothers he's going to go back there to be buried. Jacob had bought a parcel of land there during that whole thing from King Haran. And so he owned that land, and a part of Joseph's blessing at the end of chapter 50 will be where Jacob gives that land to him, and Joseph uses it then as a burial plot. where his body is supposedly there today. All right. Well, go catch up on a little bit of sleep tonight and have a great rest of your week. Now may the Lord bless and keep you. May he cause his face to shine upon you. May the Lord be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace, both now